They're just so frustrated. And they just want to get a Joe Biden waxen effigy back, or Obama, and they don't, and Donald Trump just thinks, you know what? I'm only here for 4 years, and I am going to make America great, and this time I mean it.
Hello and welcome to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. This is our Saturday edition where we do something a little bit different in our middle segment. Today, Victor's going to be talking about the Treaty at Versailles following World War I, so stay with us for that. Prior to that, we will look at continuing news stories, and Victor wanted to update us on the Goldberg leak, so we'll start off with that story. But first, let's listen to these messages. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor is the Martin and Neely Anderson Senior Fellow in Military History and Classics at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. You can find him at his website, victorhanson.com. The name of the website is The Blade of Perseus, and you can come just to read all of the free stuff, which is copious, but also you can join our subscribers and get 2 articles a week, plus a special ultra video for the subscribers. And then we also are putting on ad-free for our subscribers these podcasts, so you'll be able to locate them there as well. Well, Victor, I know that you wanted to update us on the Goldberg leak, so I'll just let you have the floor.
There's so many things that have not been answered. So he was allowed onto this secure Signal app that had 15 people, and he was on there maybe as early as the 10th or 11th, and then he got off on the 24th when he was waiting. He was almost like a predator waiting for some big deal, but then when he found out they were discussing the Houthi strike and that it happened just hours after he had been privy to some of the discussion about it, then he went public. So they all had this app, and Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, organized it. And I assume he didn't do it himself. He has staff. And Jeffrey Goldberg, JG, is on it. But there's 345 million people in the United States. So the idea that Joe Blow is not on it and he is, so there was a reason why he was on it. Do we all agree with that? Yeah. There had to be. So then let's go through logically what would be the exegesis, the reason. Number one, Mike Waltz knew about him and thought that he could be turned, or he wasn't as bad as everybody said, because after all, he had run with the Gold Star Mother story, he had run with the Sucker story, he was an agent of the Biden, Obama period people. I don't want to question Michael Waltz's veracity. So let's go to another, that when they inherited these phones, I guess they had pre-programmed apps on them, signal apps. That was what CIA Director Radcliffe testified. They thought they were going to trap him. And he said, no, we didn't introduce this mechanism. We got it from you. So did somebody pre-program that in there? Maybe there's more. I don't know. And they just didn't check? That's a possibility. Or 3, when he said, go staff, get the names, and then check everybody. Someone was sort of a Miles Taylor anonymous, or an Alexander Vindman on the National Security Council of Trump's first administration. In other words, they were deep cover, and they deliberately did this. And I thought that was unlikely. I'm starting to think that is very likely, that this thing might blow open, because unless Mike Waltz has either forgotten that he knew Jeffrey Goldberg or that he didn't understand, but there's something there, is what I'm trying to say. The other thing is, I was kind of disappointed. I'm not a journalist, I'm a historian, academic, whatever, but I do journalism. I have been embedded in Iraq. I have gone and looked at, reports, studied stuff as a journalist. But I just don't believe that when I hear all these high fives from left and right journalists that it was so wonderful that he got this great chance. I don't think that was wonderful at all. I think that I think if I was Victor and this was the Biden administration and suddenly I found myself listening to Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden or people like that discussing an attack or missiles on Iran, I wouldn't go leak it. I would type back in and said, I'm sorry, you guys included me. I shouldn't be on this. And maybe the journalist could say I was on it, but why would you stay on it? I don't understand that. He's an American. He's an American first and a journalist second. And what good would come out of that to stay there like a stealthy little cat waiting to pounce? And then the other thing is, how this didn't go on for one day. It went on for 13 days. Didn't they ever get it? Get it? And there was they should have people constantly reviewing the people that are involved. I just did a search. We had 700 applicants, and our subsection maybe had, 200. But we knew everything about the people that were on it. Every single call, the first thing I did was look at the Zoom people on it, their names. And if we had private discussions about consultations, the 4 faculty members, I would see that person, that person, that person. And we understood I wasn't going to talk about politics with anybody. So there's just something missing is what I'm saying, and we're going to find out.
I fully agree with that. There's something not right.
Mark
because
Penn tweeted, do you see what he tweeted?
What he
said, this is a joke that has about 10% likelihood that what they told us is true. Somebody was sabotaging the whole thing at some point. He should tell us, if he's so brave and he always reveals, I'm so transparent. Okay, Jeffrey, why don't you just now tell us how you got on there? How do you think you got on there? Just tell us, was it a guy named Giles with the same last name? Just give us a hypothesis. Why don't you do that? Just tell us.
That's not the Democratic modus operandi. That's the problem with it.
There were some conservative people that said, I don't blame him. I do. I blame him a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Victor, so let's turn then to tariffs. I got a broad question. I know Donald Trump is putting tariffs on quite a few things. The recent announcement today was 25% on automobiles, foreign automobiles coming in, which is half of the automobiles the United States buys. So that is a massive move. And it seems to me that Donald Trump is banking on tariffs in the long run are going to bring in some revenue for the government. And it's going to encourage increased manufacturing in the United States, like we saw with Hyundai on Friday. And that will generate income for the United States. Do you think his gamble is going to work?
If he explains it, if he were to say this, Mexico, you have $175 billion surplus because you're assembling parts of appurtenances from China. Or Canada, you have $63 billion annual trade surplus with your supposed best friend. Friends don't treat each other that way. Or if he said to Europe, you have 200 billion, or said to China, you have $1 trillion. First, to set the stage that he didn't want to do that. I don't want to do this. I have to, because you people have been you're not acting in a symmetrical fashion. But the problem with the cars are that if you actually look at the car tariffs, they're not the reason that people are not going out and buying Chryslers, Chevys, and Fords in Brussels or Hamburg or Yokohama. Two things are going on. Number one, these customers are deeply, for all their socialism, they're deeply nationalistic, and they want to support their national brands. That's number one. So Germans want to buy German cars, or at least European. And two, they've been grown up on this idea of a Cadillac with big fins, so they don't think that we can build cars as reliable. I think they see that Tesla is better than anything they make as far as EV, and that if you look at the actual ratings of American cars, pretty much they're equal to Honda or BMW as far as reliability, but they're not going to buy them regardless. And then we do have a very high tariff on our best selling are Chevy pickups and then lesser Ford pickups. And then we tell Nissan, and who I think is going out of business, we tell Honda and Toyota that they have to have about a 20% tariff. So the point is that this is not a case study that's so egregious because of asymmetry. What he's trying to do is say on wine, on agriculture, on electric pharmacy, they have this huge surplus. And the one thing that will really get their attention are things like wine from Italy or wine from France, and two, automobiles. Because if your upscale American can't get his Beamer or BMW or Audi or Lexus, and he has to pay more, and maybe he will pay more, but the money will come into us, and this will be an incentive. And we talked last time that $3 trillion of investment, Kia, Hyundai, they're all trying to relocate. So that is working. But it's really a way of saying to Europe, we don't really care about the individual items. We just want the symmetry. And all Europe has to do is say, you know what? I think you're right. We'll take that $200 million surplus and get it down to 40. How's that? And then we'll say, you know what? We'll get all 32 nations of NATO to pay 2% in their defense. And next time the Houthis attack a tanker in the Red Sea, for every ship the United States puts in there, warship, frigate, we'll bring 2. Because that's more important to us than it is to you. We only have 1% of our commerce goes through the Red Sea. So they could do these things, but instead it just gets reduced into Donald Trump wants to take Greenland. Donald Trump wants to make Canada the 51st state. Donald Trump wants to invade Panama. But Donald Trump and J.D. Vance hate Europe, but they don't talk about the underlying causes. And that's partly our fault, because we get into I understand the chaos theory to, mix it all up and get all the headlines, but we'll get hurt unless we can explain that they are the aggressor and they are the culprits, not us. We are somebody who's just sitting there on the school ground and a bully keeps hitting you and hitting you and hitting you and thinks he can get away with it. And finally you just say, you know what, you start yelling at him, but maybe you shouldn't yell at him. Maybe you should just be quietly and say, here's what you can do. What if Donald Trump had a press conference tomorrow and said, I didn't want to have any on you, Canada. Why don't we just make a deal? No tariffs on neither one of us tomorrow. Or what doesn't he just say to Canada? Okay, $10 billion surplus, fine. What in Mexico? We love you guys. No 175. Let's just make a deal. No tariff. Oh, okay, $20 billion. That's all we want. And we'll tax remittances to throw it in to kind of get back some of it. Europe, 220 billion. That would put the onus on them. But that's what we have to do.
So, Victor, let's turn to the court case in the Southern District of New York, where former hostages and Columbia students have a case against or are suing pro-Hamas protesters. And two things that I noticed about that case was, one, that one of the former hostages claimed that he heard Hamas in the tunnels while he was imprisoned, talking about how they had operatives all over U.S. college campuses. And the second thing was that the case alleges that they knew some of these pro-Hamas protesters knew that October 7th was going to happen before it actually happened.
This is very similar to the tariffs, the whole student deportation, all of that, because we don't get the message out. We're not the aggressors. We said to people, do you want to come to the United States? Here's a student visa. You come and you're a student. We don't give visas for people to come and chase Jews into libraries or rough them up. We don't give visas for people to come over here and support the work of mass murders on October 7th. We don't give visas for people to break into the halls at Columbia or the president's office at Stanford or any of these places. If you say you just say you were going to do that, we would not. This is not about free speech. It's about, I'm in a room right now and somebody's knocking on the door and said, I'm your guest. And I said, well, what do you want? I want to come in here and I want to watch TV. I said, okay, you can come in and watch TV. And then he's watching TV and he turns around and says, hey, Victor, you're an A. You know what I mean? And I would say, you're my guest. I don't want you to come here. And he'd say to me, well, I have free speech in your house. No, you don't. Maybe you have free speech that you think, but you're my guest. So there's the door. And the other thing is about it is we need to have this same, if they're going to engage in lawfare, it's what David Mamet wrote when he said, take a gun to a knife fight, and he was the screenwriter for The Untouchables. And Obama took that, remember? He borrowed that and didn't give credit to David Mamet, who was a brilliant playwright. But my point is that why don't they start suing these things abroad? Why doesn't a Tesla owner, when he gets keyed or his car gets chased down, why don't the Tesla owners of America get together and file a suit and then go to the prosecutor and say, this is organized? When you have people say, I'm going to take Tesla down, or you have Tim Waltz looking at his app and saying it's going down, down, down. It's going down because of the violence that they're encouraging. And see if there are websites and people, and then start to have prosecutors or sell them on sue them on RICO standards, that they are organized crime syndicate. They are terrorism. The left does that. So they need to use lawfare. That's the only way they're going to do it. And they need to cherry pick, for every Democratic judge, they need to cherry pick a conservative judge and sue them and see how they like it. And that's the only thing the left understands. The other thing about these protests, I think you brought it up in an earlier one, 50% are women, these students?
Yes,
Maybe
I hadn't brought that up, but I noticed that recently once again. Yes.
50 or 60%? And they have the mask on, and then you look at the protest, or when they're glorifying the hostages and the fact they were taken. You remember on October 7th, and then you see when the hostages are released, people are screaming at them. They're all men. So let me get the logic there. You're a young woman in Gaza, and you're in a traditional Islamic society, and you feel that you want to be educated and have the reins of power. Because, by the way, I see a lot of women in Israeli politics. I don't see any women that are at the top echelons of any of these terrorist organizations or even their political organizations. So you want to come over to Europe, but especially the United States, and you want to go to these universities, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, Columbia, Barnard. And then you come over here and you want to head these demonstrations glorifying October 7th. And the Intifada and River to the Sea. Does it ever strike you when you fight deportation, if you're targeted for abusing the conditions of your student visa, does it ever, you're suing to stay in the country you hate, and you're suing as a part of that not to go back to the society that you love. If Hamas is so great and you want to protest, why don't you go protest as a woman on the West Bank? Or better yet, in some of these small areas of Gaza, for the first time, people don't like Hamas. They say every time you pop up out of your tunnels, you steal food and you charge us. Every time you pop up and you let off a missile, you go back down like a rat into a tunnel and they hit us. Or you take over our mosque, you take over our schools, you take over our hospitals, and then we get hit. We don't want you. So you have this asymmetrical, the people who are living in dorms and the good life at American universities are protesting on the part of Hamas, but the actual people who are suffering from them, maybe they're starting to say, we don't like them. And then what would happen? The people in the United States would say, no, you have to have Hamas. You've got to keep fighting, but I want to get out of there as quickly as possible. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is there are so many inconsistencies with this radical Islamic student movement that they come over here. And Marco Rubio is just, he's been wonderful. He's been so unapologetic. He just says, We're not going to stop. We're going to find these creepy people. We're going to find them, and when they start to protest and they get themselves in violent confrontations or they hand out literature that promotes terrorism, we're not going to say that, we're suppressing their free speech. They can do it all they want, but they can do it in a detention center and then on an airplane and then in Syria and Lebanon and Morocco and Algeria and Gaza, where they want to be. And we could say this to them. You guys don't like the United States. You defaced veteran cemeteries. You defaced the Abraham Lincoln iconic monument. At Stanford, as I've said many times, you spray painted iconic sandstone colonnades. So you don't like the country. That's why you're doing it. But I'll make a deal with you. You don't come here, and for each one that doesn't come here, we won't go over there. How's that? Just pick 5 countries, I promise. I've been to almost every Arab country, Muslim, except in the Middle East, except Iran. I'll make a deal. Just don't come here, and I will never go to any of those again. How's that? What's so wrong with that? And there's some beautiful countries. There's wonderful places. I've enjoyed myself, but I would just make a deal. But it's always asymmetrical. No, we have to come over to your country, and we have to go to your universities, and we have to be trained, and then we have to tell your students that the Jews are horrible, and they're pigs and apes, and the river to the sea, and we're going to do all this. And we say, no, just stay home. That's all. Because you're not coming here to study. And we should, that when you have the 2 largest donors, 3, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and China, giving money for Middle East and Asian studies program. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? We know why they're doing that, because they have figured out how this country works. They think, wow, we look at the people we met in the Foreign Service. We met the people who are National Security Advisor, State Secretary of State, Undersecretary of Defense, the elite. We understand who runs the foundations. We understand who's on PBS, Miss Meyer, NPR. And we understand the people at Network News, and they're all elites. And they rise to the top out of these about 20 universities. So if we can endow these universities and get the most left-wing professors and start to get our message to them, it's a pretty good investment. And that's why this uniparty bureaucracy, media, foundation, that's what Donald Trump is trying to figure out, and he's figured it out. So I don't think the university understands they are so vulnerable. They have about 5 or 6 vulnerabilities. They're like an early model tank, and they have really bad armor and a bad gun. They don't understand that you could hit them with a tax on their endowment, and they may well do that. It's in Congress. You could hit them by saying no more 15% on surcharges. You could hit them by saying that we're going to withhold federal funds if you do not support the 64 and 65 Civil Rights Act. If you have another racially segregated admissions policy or dorm or graduation, no federal funds. You could do that. You could say, we're just not going to allow, we don't like the idea of, there's 10 countries that support terrorism. None of them can come to the United States, a travel ban. And pick the ones that are the money stream to the universities. You could say if you don't support the First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendment on campus when people are accused or when they have certain rights and you violate, no federal funds. Because most people want to know why we give anything to Columbia. It has a $15 billion endowment. Why give any federal money to Stanford? They say to us, well, it's because we cure cancer. Well, when you look at these NIH grants, maybe a third of them aren't. They're not. They're DEI and underserved this and overserved that and disproportionate this. So they are so vulnerable. And what they're doing now with the Trump administration, they're so two-faced, especially the Columbia president. They go like this to Trump. Oh, don't cut off $400, please, $400 million. Oh, you want us to enforce our own suggestions from our anti-Semitic committee that said that we were infected with anti-Semitism. Okay, we'll do that. Oh, no mask? So if they have a mask, they have to take it off and be identified or they're okay. Oh, We have to, if we find people guilty of violence, we have to suspend them, and we have to turn over to immigration that they're no longer in the university for deportation. Okay. And then you'll keep the money? Yes. And then they're thinking, they go back to each other and they think, wow, that's great. That's all the stuff that'll get the lunatics out of the asylum and let us be in control again. But we'll do this. So we'll say, and this is what they're doing. They're saying, a little memo from your president. Why, we're strongly committed to DI. And we believe that we all have unlimited rights of free speech. Unfortunately, we're in a leveraged position. The Trump administration is forcing us to do the following, right? And then they're really happy because they don't want a bunch of lunatics with masks defacing their campus. And then you get, like, I think at Columbia, it was at 82 or something, you get the faculty, the little tenured for life guys. How dare you do this? You got to stand up to Trump. And they say, well, we stand up for Trump. It's 400 million. That's okay with principle. Well, that 400 million might be your tenured position. Oh my God. No, don't do that. But they're trying to go back and forth. So they tell the faculty, we're doing everything we can to fight for you. And then they tell Trump, we're doing everything we can to keep the 400 million. But you know what they're doing. They're talking to whatever
They're
everybody wants to
talking
say.
out of both
I
sides of their
wouldn't,
mouth,
yes, and
Victor.
I wouldn't keep doing it because Marco Rubio and Donald Trump know you, you one-eyed jack. They flip that cord over and they see your other side, and they'll just cut the money off. And they can do exactly what you're doing with Lawfare. They can just say the money is cut off, and you can go sue them, and let's take it in the court. Maybe they can get a Republican judge. Just say, well, now it's cut. Maybe go to the Supreme Court. So you won't have your money for a year. How's that?
Okay, Victor, let's. I agree with you, though. They're just saying, yeah, we're not going to we're going to enforce no masks. And then they let them all have these N95 masks.
That was such a little, that's what it's stupid. What do you call it? You know, the word sophomore is, it's from Greek, sophos, moros, and it means a wise idiot or wise fool, because you're not a freshman anymore. You're half educated and half stupid still, your second year. Well, that's what sophomores are, all faculty members at academic. They have knowledge in their particular narrow field, but and otherwise are moronic. And so they think we've out no mask, and then they had a little asterisk in case of illness. So then they say N95, N93, N92, and they put that out in their literature like, oh, wow. So now you guys are really sincerely concerned about people's health. That's the only, I didn't know that. Well, we're not stupid, but they think you're stupid. They're stupid for being so childish with an anecdote like that.
Absolutely. Well, Victor, let's go ahead and take a break and then come back and talk a little bit about the Versailles Treaty. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. For you who have joined us for the first time or haven't heard, Victor is on X. His handle is at VD Hanson, and he's on Facebook at Hanson's Morning Cup. So if those are your social media outlets, you can join him there. So, Victor,
Before you start, though, can I mention
go
something?
ahead.
I don't know really, I don't understand AI, but I think on our podcast we were talking about something, and I mentioned I got stung and I went into anaphylaxis. Did you know what AI? Somebody sent me this, and it shows my head glued to a body. And by the way, I don't weigh 220 pounds. I weigh about 198, 200. But the point is that I'm in agony, and it looks like a wasp or something, and I'm rolling on the ground. And then I said, I think it was in this, I said, the Hispanic middle class is making great, strides, and that's why they're turning on the left. And I said that some Hispanic women and the paramedics came, and they were absolutely wonderful. And I said, I don't think I need, and they took my shirt off and saw these big welts in my throat, and they got me, EpiPen. So they look in this video like they're marching at me, running. And so my point is, who's doing all this? I don't mind, the Freddy Krueger imitations, but AI is doing this. I'm going to find out who did that. Everything is falling apart. My house was swatted. 3 sheriffs come out here as if there's an intruder and go around the grounds. And I'm not blaming them, but somebody called in and said there was an incident to have 3 of them. And that's been going on. There was another one today. And they want to stage a confrontation. It's like the left is just really treading water. They don't understand what in bad shape they're going to be in if they keep pushing it.
I think they do understand. And
somebody's going to get killed.
Yeah. I think that they don't care that there are civilization destroyers because they say they don't believe in this civilization.
We have these wild pit bulls, and I don't have any handgun because I had kids, but I have a lot of guns here. And on rare occasions, when I walk by myself. I haven't done it lately, but I've taken a shotgun over my shoulder because I never know when a rabid coyote or a pit bull that's dumped will come at you. But if I had one of those and I was here, say I was walking out of the orchard with a shot, and they were there looking for an intruder, you can see what could happen. Anyway, getting back to the Versailles Treaty. I wrote about it in the Second World Wars. I've studied it a lot. There is more misinformation about the Versailles Treaty, and we're talking about the Congress at Versailles, France, that took place from January of 1919 till June of 1919, almost 6 months. And the big 4 were Orlando of Italy, David Lloyd George of Britain, Woodrow Wilson of the United States, and Clemenceau of France. And these 4 did not invite the Germans, the defeated Germans, and they crafted over 6 months a detailed peace treaty. And you're just going to say, well, Victor, the war was over on the 11th month of the 11th, on the 11th day of the 11th hour, November 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning of 1918. Yes, and that is the problem. 20 days of November, 30 days of December, half of January. So you had this huge Allied force, and they had been beaten by the Germans or stalemate. Americans bring over 1 million with another 1 million in the pipeline. The Germans take Russia, and they move 500,000 troops, as we said, in the spring offensive. And then the Americans rush in, and it failed. So then in April, May, June, July, August, the Allies go crazy and push them back. And at some point, the German army is about to crumble. And some of the advanced Allied contingents are in the Rhineland, and they're close to the Rhine River. Okay. And the Germans want an armistice. So here's number one problem. I'm just going to say what were the problems and then the misinterpretation. Very quickly, the treaty followed several weeks later. It was not a surrender. It was not like World War II when the Germans said, well, what are the conditions? They said unconditional surrender. It wasn't like the Civil War when the South said, what are the conditions? Unconditional, or we'll keep fighting. We should have done that. We had a maniac in the White House, Woodrow Wilson, that lived on another planet, not Earth. So we didn't do that. That was number one. So there was a space. Everybody stopped fighting, and then they didn't have the actual agreement till later. Number two, the army that was collapsing did not collapse in Germany, as in World War II or in the Civil War. It would be as if the army under Lee, the Army of Northern Virginia, it was still in northern Pennsylvania when it surrendered or when it had an armistice. Or it would be as like the United States Army was in France and said, oh my God, and then the Germans came to them and let's just call it off. So the German army was in Belgium and France. That was the second problem, besides the delay. Number three, by the time the Versailles Treaty was really going in March and April of the Americans had pulled back over 500,000 people. And Britain was taking almost, so there was only about 20% of the occupation troops. One. Two, the Germans had created this already stab in the back idea that the socialists and there was some truth to it, but very little. had stabbed them in the back, that they were on the offensive. If you hadn't have stabbed them, they would have won. This is what Ludendorff, General, and Hindenburg. That was not true. They would have been catastrophic. Number 4, Wilson would not allow Marshal Foch and John J. Pershing and the British to go into France, and they could have crossed the Rhine, and they could have gone all the way to Berlin, and you would have had something World War II. So does everybody see the problem? By the time that the conference was going on in the Trianon Hotel in Versailles, the dynamics had changed. Germans were emboldened that they hadn't been occupied, so they were starting to say, well, we never really lost. And they looked at the battlefield and they said, there's not that many British here. You want to start the war again? There are not many there. They weren't going to start because they were beaten. And we had Woodrow Wilson saying, 14 in January, he's only been in the war since April of 1917. In 1918, we're going to have 14 points. I'm God on earth, Messiah, Wilson. And we're going to have freedom of the seas and a League of Nations. The Germans thought, not bad. We don't get punished for starting the war. So they said, well, we'll do it, but we want the 14 points. And anyway, so when the conference went on, what was the result of it? Germany had to be defanged because they had been in a war 1870-71. This was the second time. So they said, okay, you're going to give up Pomerania and parts of East Prussia. And it was a really stupid idea because there was this little Danzig corridor. So they had East Prussia, Königsberg, not connected to Germany. They had to give up parts of the Sudetenland. They had to give up parts to Poland. So they were angry that the German Second Reich was pruned. And then they had to pay reparations. Theoretically, they could pay it in timber or coal or manufactured goods, but they were assessed in today's dollars about $25 billion. The weird thing was that the Allies, when we came in, we were paying for their shells, we were paying for their gas, we were for the French and British, and they owed us about $15 billion. So how do you get the money? The only way you can get the money is to force the Germans to pay their reparations to the Allies. And we were actually loaning Germany money so they would pay the French and British so they could pay us back. And France and Britain were broke. And you can see when we talk about the Great Depression, this is one of the problems with the Great Depression. So what did Germany do? Everybody says, well, it was so harsh. Well, they just started printing money. And they didn't pay it back in gold bullion, $15 billion. And the French, they started to go into work stoppages. So the French came in and occupied the coal mines of the Saarland. So they never really paid back the reparations. Next thing, it was supposed to be based on the League of Nations. But when Wilson came back to the United States, he was so arrogant. He didn't take really many Republican opposition leaders with him. He just came back and he said, you know what, we're going to have a League of Nations, and we're going to rule the world. This group they had a Security Council, the Big Four, and Russia. And they said, no, we're not giving up any sovereignty. So that's when he barnstormed the country and had the stroke. So why did everybody say the Versailles Treaty was too hard on Germany? Mostly because one little 240-something article said that the primary cause of the war was Germany, what we call the war guilt clause, and that the Kaiser should be put on trial. And they went furious over that. Not that they liked the Kaiser anymore, but they were afraid that Ludendorff and Hindenburg would be put in trial. But inside Germany, the Weimar Republic was losing its currency, and already there were proto-Nazi brown shirts saying anybody who signs that treaty we're going to kill or we're going to disown. So it was hard to find anybody 6 months later that would sign it, 8 months after the war. Now, why do today we say it's harsh besides the war clause and the reparations, which mostly because of John Maynard Keynes and the recent war, and he called it a Carthaginian peace. Mr. Keynes, they did not go in the Third Punic War from 149 to 146, level the entire city, kill everybody, and take 50,000 survivors and put them in slavery, and then recolonize it at 100. They didn't do that, did they? It was not a Carthaginian peace. It was not. So how do we assess it? We can assess it by other peace treaties, contemporaneous and before and after. Let's take two that Germany was in. I might as well take three that Germany was involved in. Oh, better thought four. Very quickly, 1871, they defeat France, and what do? They take the Alsace-Lorraine, and they keep it. Not negotiable. They demand an enormous reparation from the French. Yes, they take machine goods and agricultural products. It's much tougher than the Versailles Treaty. Let's go to September program. They have a plan when they invade in June of 1914. German professor who taught at Columbia, he outlines it. He called it the September program. By September, we'll be at the French coast. And guess what? We're going to take Le Havre and New Rochelle and Dunkirk and Brest, all their ports. We're going to get a strip, and that's going to be ours so that we have U-boats and warm water ports. And there isn't going to be any more Belgium. We're just going to take it. It's done for. We're going to annex it. It's on our border in the Ardennes. We're going to take it. That was what they wanted to do had they won World War. And then they were involved in a third peace, and that was called the Treaty of Versailles, and that was in February of 1918. They defeated Tsarist Russia, partly because the Kaiser put Lenin in a rail car and sent him over there, and he caused disruption. That was a stab in the back, the real stab in the back. But what did they do what did they demand from a defeated Russia? All of the Baltic states, all of Belarus, all of Ukraine, 50 million people, 1 million square miles. And that is one reason they lost the war, because they had an available 1.5 million men on the Eastern Front. They had a wonderful rail system. They only put back about 500 or 600. Why? Because they were so darn greedy. They wanted to occupy all of this part of Western Russia. It's where Ukraine is today. And so they had 1 million people idle while they needed them on the Western Front. That's the third thing. And then finally we have the World War II treaty. If you think that World War I was so harsh and it caused World War II, what would you then compare the Allied agreement outlined at Yalta and finalized with Germany at Potsdam? In other words, unconditional surrender, and we'll give you the details. Well, we split Germany into 4 parts. 3 of them became West Germany, France, Britain, and the United States. And then we created Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Alsace-Lorraine went back to France. And then we physically went into Germany and occupied it and put a gun to their head and said, you're going to be a democracy, and we're still there. Okay, and we said, it's not going to happen this way. You said under the Versailles Treaty you could only have 100,000 army. You broke it. You said that you wouldn't have a Luftwaffe. You broke it. This time, you're not going to have anything unless we say so. And then finally, when Russia, and East Germany united, we said, okay, now it's time to rearm and part of NATO. My point is, when you look at the Franco-German War, when you look at the September program, when you look at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, when you look at World War II, which kept the peace, in every single case, Germany was involved, and they were all harsher than what Versailles was. It was the most lenient, and it was the one that failed spectacularly. So Marshal Foch was he said, this is not a peace treaty. It's just a hiatus for 20 years, and the war will start. Because Germany did not think they were beaten. They were not occupied. They were not humiliated. They felt that they had been betrayed, and they had stabbed in the back. And it was a complete myth, and it fueled Hitler. Had they been occupied like World War II, there was no Hitler groups. There were some werewolves. They called themselves the werewolves in June of 1945. That were resistance. They dissipated and petered out in 2 months. So they knew they were beaten. If you looked at Dresden or Hamburg or Berlin compared to 1918, they knew they were beaten. And they knew who beat them, and they knew who was occupying them, and they know who was feeding them and telling them what to do, but not during World War One. So that was a myth that Keynes promulgated.
One question. The thing that struck me about the Versailles Treaty was that all the provisions that you said against Germany or blaming them for the war, but they also had one last provision that was if Germany should become belligerent again, then the other powers would unite against them. And that kind of tells you that even as they were signing the treaty, they understood that Germany was probably going to start another war after this. And so I
Well, they
thought,
knew that because if you had looked at the combined population of Germany, it was still almost 75 million. It was the largest country in Europe. Number two, it had the largest economy. Number three, they knew that if it started a war, it would be very dependent on Russia balancing on the Eastern Front. But Russia was now Russia was now communist, and they were not close to France and Britain, so they weren't sure what Russia would do. Number five, in 1914, Germany had buffer states, and that was the Austria-Hungary Empire. That dissolved, and there were all of these weak new places, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and they did not have an ally, a Germanic-speaking ally like, Ferdinand Joseph and the monarchy of the Austria-Hungary Empire. They had Russia and its satellites right next to it. So when you look at the map, actually, after World War One, Germany in a strategic condition was in better shape than it was in 1914. And the other thing was they knew this. This is very important for our listeners because it's very relevant today. So they were all saying France lost 1.2 million men. Britain lost 1 million. We only lost 117,000. So they came out of there and they said to Wilson, you have to join us. They knew the United States saved the day. And that's why Wilson bullied everybody, because he knew he had the ace card. He was a very weird dichotomy. The United States came out with the least amount of debt, and everybody owing it money, and the strongest economy. And so, but the least amount of time fighting. And Wilson used that to take control of Versailles, to create the League of Nations, which is a joke. There was no enforcement clause. But more importantly, he told them at Versailles, the United States will back you up. We will sign a treaty that if you're invaded by Germany, we'll come back again. But he hated the Republican Senate, so he went back and he said, we're going to have a League of Nations and surrender sovereignty to the League of Nations, to an international police force, maybe, and we're going to have a defense pact. And they said, are you crazy? We don't want to go back there again. We're done. And so it was just, there was no mechanism to stop Germany. And Germany, they had all of these fanatic Germans in Sudetenland and what is Poland and East Pomerania, and there was no enforcement. And so Hitler just said, I'm going to create a Reich, a third one, and we're going to get everybody who speaks German in the same place. And the French said, well, the British, you've got to come over here. And the British said, well, you've got to have more men before we come over here. And then they said, well, where's the United States? Well, the United States is in a depression. Its army is the size of Portugal now. So it's the same thing now when France, Stormer, and Macron said, we're going to get a peace treaty, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to have a European. We have more people than Russia does. We have a bigger air force. And then Spain or Belgium or the Netherlands said, but can I ask a question? What's going to be the role of the awful, terrible Donald Trump? Well, who's going to be backing us? She's our backstop. She's going to provide money and logistics and air support. I'll join, but have you asked him? Well, no, we can't ask him because we despise him or we hate his guts. We can't make him look good, but we'll just honor the. But I don't think he's going to come. So, well, even if he doesn't come, we have 500,000 troops. We have 2,000. I know, but we like cappuccino and we like to stay here in Florence. Why would I want to go over there and fight? And that's what the problem is. It's always the United States.
You know, as you're speaking, you're reminding me that another story I read about Europe was that the EU started to demand that Putin back out of all the territory he's gained in Ukraine. And now I can see why Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland are starting to mine their borders to create a demilitarized zone with Russian states, because this doesn't look good for them, for anyone.
They know what they've been doing. They've been totally disarmed, not disarmed, but totally unwilling to fight. And they've got this Russia, and it's not the Soviet Union with 240 million people. It's a shrinking, kleptocratic, huge country that India and China are ascendant, and they look at this thing, and Putin is saying, I need every Russian speaker in the world, and I'm going to take Donbass and Crimea and get me 8 million Russians. So they all knew that, and they all know that if they stick together, they can win, and easily. But it's like the Aesop's fable and the mice. We all know this cat devours us, and we have a plan. This little mouse says, it's actually in Greek. You can read it, and we just have to go take a little band with a bell, and we just walk up and throw it on his neck, and then every time it comes to eat us, we'll have warning. And then one little mouse says, well, who's going to bell the cat? And they all look at each other and point. So who's going to be the first person to go to the Donbass frontier? Well, France can do it. Now they're talking about a nuclear deterrent. We're going to get our own nuclear deterrent. And then they're thinking, uh-oh, we have 200 nukes. Britain has 220. Russia has 6,000. We always counted on the United States 6,000 or 55. We're down a little bit under Obama. And then they'll say, well, Germany is a very sophisticated power. Maybe they can make... no, I'll pass on Germany. We've had 3 world wars they started, or 3 wars. So that's... And then, and then a French diplomat says, could I object? I think you must know that... NATO was created to keep America in and Russia out, but Germany down, down, down. So why would you get them nuclear weapons after they've attacked? And that's what they're dealing with. They're just so frustrated, and they just want to get a Joe Biden waxen effigy back, or Obama, and they don't. And Donald Trump just thinks, you know what? I'm only here for 4 years, and I am going to make America great, and this time I mean it. I'm going to unleash the American economy, and I'm going to build bombers and fighters and Fortress America, and I'm going to have a closed border, and I'm going to unite the country by class nationalism, no more DI woke, and this is going to be the most powerful, strongest country in the world, and that's my plan. And then we're not going to take crap off anybody. We're not going to start wars. We're going to be Andrew Jacksonian. Don't tread on me. No better friend, no worse enemy. Do not screw with the United States. That's his whole plan. And you know what? Even people that hate him, down in the deep heart of everybody, communists, socialists, leftists, there's always a desire to be heroic and to be strong. And they know that. And that's what the Democrats can't figure out. They're down to 27%. Yes, it's because of Jasmine Crockett. Yes, it's because of the Squad. Yes, it's because of the lunatics. Yes, it's because they're on the wrong side of everything. But it's also that people don't want to be walked over, insulted, ridiculed, have people come into their country and tell them, I want a hotel room in New York, go into the inner city of Chicago among struggling African Americans, say, hey, I need that waiting room. I'm going to have a doctor's appointment before you do. So they don't want that. They want to be second to none. Trump is like that famous line in in the Aeneid, and I think they ask why. It's about the boat race in the festive games. I think and they're rowing, and one side starts to get all excited, and then they row and win, and Virgil says they can because they think they can. And Trump is trying to say you got to get rid of this ideology, and if you think you can be preeminent and you can have fair trade and a prosperous country and more energy than anybody in the world, you can do it. But it's up here in your brain. You have to think it.
Well, Victor, let's go ahead and take a break and then come back and talk a little bit more about a few things. I have some questions about things we were addressing earlier. So stay with us and we'll be back. We're back, and Victor has a footnote he would like to make.
I don't mean we're going to be great in dictators' terms, because somebody's going to say, oh, you want to be great like Hitler or like Mussolini. No. I want to be great so that the United States doesn't want to aggrandize anything. It just wants to be confident and united and independent, because it's so unique, and it's going to get, the rest of the world's falling apart. And we have to be very careful who we let in, and we have to be worried about us. And the European model failed. The Russian model failed. The Islamic model failed. The Chinese model, 1.1 fertility.
I feel like we're in a new age, basically, and I'm not referring to Trump's golden
Novo
age.
ordo
But
seclorum.
yes, we are. And I feel like it's no longer the Cold War, so we're not under that model anymore. And Europe can't get used to that fact. I mean, they just
Are
have.
you questioning the transatlantic election? Have you talked to the people at the Foreign Council, Foreign Relations Council on Foreign Relations?
Well,
Have you gone to the Brookings Institute and discussed this?
I think Donald Trump, though, sees it that he has a big opportunity to redefine America in the world economy, in world politics, and I think he's doing the right thing.
I think that he's playing high stakes gamble. He's waging a counter revolution on every conceivable aspect. He's thought, and he's got some of the smartest people around. And for 4 years of torment, at night they gamed everything out. And they said, ultimately, you cannot win politically if you don't address the bureaucracy, the administrative state, the propaganda organs like NPR, PBS, the universities that are completely racist and contrary to the Constitution and siphoning off billions of dollars. And you can't do it with an open border and 30 million illegal aliens. And we're going to go whole hog and address every aspect of this left-wing revolution. And that's what they're doing. Yeah. People, did you see this guy on CNN? He always looks at Trump's favorabilities and he's supposed to be a leftist like that, but you can see a little smirk on his file. And he goes, Donald Trump has got the highest country going in the right direction favorability in 20 years. And he starts smiling and he waves, and then you look at all the people, like on the panel, and they're going like, shut the... Rasmussen still has him 51-49. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And he's got an authentic Renaissance genius that is Elon Musk.
Yes, he does. I think it bodes well for him. But one thing he did this week was pull Elise Stephanik's nomination from the UN ambassador. And I was wondering your thoughts on that change.
He's appointed so many people. I think there's 4 of them that had House seats. And then he's got a couple of House members that will not vote on anything except idealism from another planet. I mean, they're admirable characters, but if any compromise, they won't do it. So he's down to 1 or 2 votes. So I think what he's saying to Stephanik is, if you look at the average tenure of a UN ambassador, it's about 1.5 years, because they get worn out, that horrific job. So why don't you just stay in your seat so we don't lose it? Because Holshik, the governor, had already said she was going to delay it as long as possible, the special election, and let's consolidate it. I think this might be, unless he gets destroyed health-wise or something horrible happens, I think the economy will start to rebound big time by this time next year, right before the midterms. And I think he'll actually pick up seats, especially in the Senate.
Let's hope so.
But
That's
you
for
can't
sure.
really tell in politics, whoever knew about this little psychodrama, this signal story, and there'll be another one tomorrow, and they're talking about it as if it's January. I was just waiting the other day. I thought, when is January 6th? And sure enough, I turned on MSNBC and somebody said worse than January 6th.
Well, maybe what's interesting that is bad and not worse than anything here or there is that J.D. Vance has planned to go to Greenland, but then
His wife did,
Greenland,
yeah, and he was going to join her, yeah.
yeah, Greenland has canceled his visit, at least with the formal officials of Greenland. So I was wondering.
I think that they got all the use out of Trump they can. They're thinking, here's what they're thinking: the Greenland, what is it, 50,000 people in Greenland? But their little council is thinking, we were so tired of these far off Danes that are farther away from us than New York, these European colonialists. And here we are as part of North America. And Donald Trump was very useful because he hammered about invading everything, and they gave us $1 billion. And now we've had a referendum for greater autonomy. And we've got the best of both worlds. We've got U.S. security. So if the Chinese or the Russians just say it's ours, the United States has bases here. But we don't even have to pay any attention to Denmark because they'll just give us money because they're afraid of Trump. So why would we push it any further? When Don Jr. came, and it was kind of dangerous because we thought everybody would throw snow at him, but they kind of liked him. And so if he comes here, we don't know what our 50,000 people could do. So let's just say that he's too volatile, controversial, and let him go up to one of those Arctic bases that we lease out to them. That's what's happened.
Well, just something to continue on the Vance. He has been a big critic of Europe's or the EU's Digital Service Act, which has the requisite vague language that. So they've put into this Digital Service Act all these things, vague notions, and as we all know, that's just part of censorship. So Vance has been a big critic of the EU's plans.
There's two things that is going on. You saw the signal discussions with Vance was the most proponent of basically what do we get out of the Red Sea compared to what Europe gets out of it. They're freeloading. Sound like Obama. They're free riders, as I said to Jack or you. So he's the most skeptic, but it's also a domestic argument because, as I said, the way he got Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Andreessen and Horowitz and Musk and all of them and back on the team, so to speak, was that he said, I'm a nationalist, I'm not an ideologue. Trump said that. And I will defend you to the end from these European crazy people that want to take your profits, tax you, steal your money, censor you. But you've got to be Americans and you've got to invest in here. And they are. And so you invest stuff here and you help your fellow Americans and you make us rich with all your talent. And they won't touch a hair in your head. I promise you, the Chinese or the Europeans or anybody. And that's the deal. And he's really appealed to their self-interest. And I mentioned that before about FDR, the socialist, who went out and reached out to every capitalist billionaire, or what was then a multimillionaire, to take over the economy. Henry Kaiser, you mean I can build ships in Oakland area? Yeah. All you have to, well, I'd like to make an assembly line. Yeah. How many could you make? I could make a Liberty ship every 3 days, but I'd have to tear out a corridor about a mile long. Go ahead and do it. Henry Ford, I can make a B-24 every hour, but you've got to give me 1 million square feet of space where will or run. You mean you're just going to take that swamp and build it? Go ahead and do it. And that's what they did. William Knudsen, GM, and they appealed to all these capitalist conservatives and said, if you're for America, then you're for Roosevelt. And that was a big, they asked him, this isn't the New Deal. And he says, this is Dr. War now, Dr. War, not Dr. New Deal. And he basically was saying, all that stuff I started in 33, it was a total failure. And now in 39 and 8, we were in a recession. This stuff, it's a success.
All right, Victor. And just to close off this podcast here this weekend, there was a new book coming out, not out yet, by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnese, and it's Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. And it talks about how Kamala's people were planning for Joe's death in 2023.
I've beaten this story over the head, but I was on a Fox show and I said that Joe Biden was reptilian and I was chastised. I don't think I was back on that show very often to this day, but I was right about that. I kept writing all these articles about he was non-compos mentis. They knew it. And there's another article about, there's another article that the White House advisor, I think to Jill Biden, he came out today and said he was disgusted at the way the White House communications under Anita Dunn. Remember Anita Dunn? She was the Obamaite. As I recall, it said one of her heroes was the greatest mass murderer in history, Mao Zedong. And then finally even Obama had to get rid of her. Well, she, of course, reappeared under Biden and, of course, went back to her true form, which was Maoist. And so this guy was basically saying, we just berated all those reporters. We called them up and we yelled and screamed at them. We said, we want your questions in advance. We just treated them like they were helots, serfs. And he was now, well, why didn't he tell us then? Why didn't you resign and tell us? Why didn't all you people that were involved in the cover-up resign? Because you have no character. So now we're learning that Joe Biden basically knew, and we knew that because he had the list of all the guys' names in order, remember? And he had some of them, even the questions, you could see it. So they knew he was demented, and now they're telling us. And then here, it's so funny that democracy dies in darkness. We're the party of the people. And here's Donald Trump. And I was watching the other day, he was walking to the helicopter and they were yelling and screaming. Reagan used to act like he was deaf. Hey, can't hear you, can't hear you. You know what I mean? And Nixon would go, hey, we're having a press conference in 2 weeks. I will address that. And Trump just turns around and says, yes, come over here. He'll speak to anybody, anytime, anywhere, about anything. And they would love that, but they hate him. So what is it, press and media? Do you like complete transparency? Or do you like somebody who treats you like a helot, a serf? And I guess it's the latter. They have no character, the modern media. Everybody's so sick of them.
Yeah, we really are.
They're really sick of them. And now it's really sad in a way. What happened to Chris Cuomo and Joy Reid and all of them? And Don Lemon. Remember he was taking little pictures on the subway or something?
Aren't they all trying to have podcasts just like Gavin Newsom?
I don't know. I don't know what Don Lemon's ratings are, but I said little Victor out in Selma, California, in a former barn. Probably, we were number 11 on Audible, and I think one time we're number 6 on the Apple. So I think we can outdo Don Lemon.
I think so.
Don Lemon will only talk about Don Lemon, number 1 and 2 race, and 3 race, and 4 race, and 5 race. Like Jasmine. One last thing that I was going to ask you and the audience. So I did a Newsmax the other day, and they had clips of Jasmine Crockett before and after. They had her in 2021 maybe, and the introduction to it was she had gone to prep school for $30,000. Her parents were upscale. I think one of them was involved as a preacher, and she didn't have those crazy glasses. She was dressed, and they asked her some questions about she was going to run for Congress. And her accent was like this. Yes, I'm going to run for Congress, and I didn't expect it. They called me up the party, and I was ready. It's a big difference. And then they showed her once she got into Congress. You all Hot Wheels, he's a honey mess. And I thought, which fake is real? Was it the prep school, was a veneer to that, or was she trying to talk ghetto talk, or so, I don't know what would
Crass
be.
Crockett is her real self.
Well, I know she's crass, but
Yeah.
that all you
And
all and
jive.
out man, you need to be knocked on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you didn't act like that a little while ago. So what is it? What is the motivation? Is the motivation, I look around in the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi is at Biden level now, bumping into things.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer keeps threatening terrorism. Now he's, oh, we're going to go down there in your Republican districts and we're going to cause so much trouble. You'll agree. He's just completely crazy. He's Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, that guy. And they look, there's no leadership. And they all say, there's Josh Shapiro. And then you hear Josh Shapiro, and he's really slick and oily like Newsom. There's nobody except Fetterman. He's the only guy that makes sense.
He's the only guy that seems authentic, like he just
He's
says what he
authentic. He
thinks.
dresses. He doesn't care. They ask him about, did you hear what AOC? And he says, you don't know how little I care about that. And so they don't have anybody. And that vacuum, people are coming up to take over the space. And you have, is it Judge Boasberg? So Judge Boasberg is a non-entity. So this guy is in a little district court judge that nobody even knows. And you think, you know what? Trump has the White House, the Representative, Senate. They won the Supreme Court. They won the votes. And there's nobody out there opposing them. And they're all mess in Congress. But there's me. There's me. So I'm going to oppose, and I'll get cherry picked for I'll just call up my friends. My wife was a Democratic immigration person, and I'll just say, I'm here. You want to help get back Trent? Get him back? I'm here. You want another thing where you sue and now you're going to make him turn over the signal thing? I'm here. And that's what he's done. He's become a rock star. And then Jasmine Crockett thinks, AOC, she's a has-been. She's kind of domesticated now, but I'm fiery like she was. She can't even hop around the stage anymore. So she thinks, I'm going to be the crazy person, and I'll hitch up with crazy Bernie. And then, so that's those people. Those are their political leaders. They kept saying the Democratic Party doesn't have any. They do. They have district judges, and they have these crazy people that have this teenage potty mouth. They can't finish a word without D-I-C-K or ass, etc. They're profane, juvenile, crazy people. And then they have the street, the third pole of their power. And the street is burning Teslas. It's calling in 9/11 to SWAT people. It's cutting the cords on chargers. It's attacking Tesla dealers. It's keying cars. And that's what they are. And they think, and they have the campuses, the street people. And the street people say, well, 2020, hell, but we did $3 billion of damage, killed 35 people, injured 15 police officers, 1,500, burned down a courthouse, burned down a precinct, just tried to get to Trump, burned down, tried to torch the St. John's. And what happened to us? Nothing. 14,000 arrests. Everybody was let go. That was defund the police forever. Nothing's going to happen to us. And universities, we can do whatever we want. We can do whatever we want to Tesla. So Bondi is really going to have to do some RICO acts. And that latest guy they caught trying to firebomb, they caught him throwing. They need to indict him. They need to charge him with racketeering and conspiracy. And if he's guilty, they need to put him in prison for 20 years. And that will be, as the French say, to encourage the others.
You're right. Well, Victor, thank you for all your wisdom this weekend. We appreciate it. And thanks to the audience for choosing to listen to us.
Thank you a lot for this is today. 3 weeks ago, I got the flu and I have no cough and I'm back, but I have zero energy. But I'm going to find one of my readers will hear that and say, Dear Victor, here's the elixir. You take a little bit of this and this is and drink it and you're back on your feet.
And sometimes they're right.
They were right about, I thought Freddy Krueger, and they had a picture of Freddy Krueger next to me. And I thought, oh my God, are you the guy that sent me the cartoon of Skeletor in my face? God, who are these people? They're geniuses.
All right. This is Sami Winc and Victor Davis Hanson wishing you a good weekend from the Victor Davis Hanson Show.
Thank you for listening, everybody. I much appreciate it. And viewing as well.